Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Dino. It is a cold, wet December day here in Niagara Falls, Ontario, but it's a perfect day to get out here in the shop and address an issue that many owners of older ATVs or older motorcycles may face at some point. And that is a leaking or ineffective petcock on the gas tank itself. This 2004 Yamaha Bruin is having just that. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself something warm to drink and enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed. I can't wait for snow. I really can't. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, what the heck is a petcock? Well, if you're a new rider or a younger rider, you may not know what this term is, but most motorcycle and ATV riders know what a petcock is, even if they don't use the right term. And what it refers to is your fuel shutoff, that little knob up there or little lever underneath your fuel tank. Now on older motorcycles or ATVs like this, especially older ones that lack a fuel gauge, your petcock serves a couple functions. The first is it allows you to shut fuel off completely to the carburetor when the motorcycle or ATV is parked. And it's probably the most important function that the petcock has. Anytime that you stop your motorcycle or ATV for a long period of time, like overnight, you really should shut your petcock off. And the reason for this is if you don't shut the fuel off, you are relying on your needle and seat inside your float bowl to stop fuel from entering the carburetor. Now, if it continues to flow fuel into the carburetor, it's going to overflow and you're going to get puddles of gasoline underneath your motorcycle. And if your overflow tube's plugged, there is the potential that the fuel could flow all the way up through your needle valve into the carburetor and ultimately into the cylinder of your motorcycle, creating some real problems. The second function, especially on motorcycles without a fuel gauge, is the fact that a petcock normally has three positions. It has off, that we've already talked about. It has on, which is where you want to run your motorcycle most times or most of the time. And in the on position, most petcocks give a rider about 4/5 of the fuel available in the tank to ride with. When you use up those 4/5 or 3/4 or whatever the petcock is set to, the motorcycle will stall out. It'll run out of fuel. At this point, you can turn the petcock to the third position, which is normally reserve or RES. This gives the rider the ability to access that additional fuel left in the tank and ride to where they can fill the tank back up, whether that's back home or to a fuel station or tap into their buddy's fuel tank if they have a 30-liter tank like I do on my DR650. My friend Carl calls it the Exxon Valdez. Now, these petcocks do wear out and they do start leaking over time, or in the case of this particular petcock, it will not shut fuel flow off. So today, we're going to take apart and replace the petcock on this bike. Now, there's usually a couple things you can do if you have a leaking or non-functioning petcock. Sometimes you can just take these things apart. They're usually held together with small fasteners. You can clean them up, lubricate them, put them back together, and oftentimes they will work. There's also rebuild kits available for many petcocks on the market, but to be honest, it's almost as inexpensive to just buy an aftermarket replacement kit. And that's what I did for this Bruin. This cost me, I think, $32 Canadian, and I ordered it on Amazon. Let's take a look at what comes in the kit here. It comes with some new fuel hose, which is a great thing to have. It comes with this extension, which on the Bruin, it's used because the petcock sits inboard quite a way, so it has this sort of lever extension that bolts on. Comes with the petcock itself, has a new gasket O-ring. It has filters here for both your primary and secondary drawing. And it even comes with some gear clamps here. So this is a complete kit that you can use to rebuild your Bruin. Now, not all petcocks are exactly the same, so you need to match these up based on, the motorcycle or ATV that you're using. In fact, why don't we take a look at my stock DR650 petcock, and I'll show you a couple differences. Here is my stock DR650, and here is the stock DR650 petcock right down here. And you'll see this one has a lever on it. It doesn't have that extension that the Bruin has. But this petcock is also different in a couple other ways. The first of which, if you look down here, it doesn't really have an off position, which is kind of confusing if you're new to DR650s. It has an on, it has a reserve, and then it has this PRI setting, which for me at first was kind of confusing. What exactly is this? Well, let's flip this tank upside down and we'll have a look at it so I can explain it a little bit better to you. When you flip this over onto its side here, probably the first thing you're going to notice is a DR650 has 2 inlet ports into the petcock. Now, this is not unique to the DR650 as far as I understand it, but it is different than a lot of simpler petcocks. This second smaller port has this plate on the back, and this plate houses a rubber diaphragm and probably a spring. I've never really had this open. And what this does is when the motorcycle is running, this secondary port here is connected right onto the carburetor, and vacuum is drawn, opening up your petcock. This is why there's no off position on a DR650. So when the bike is running, it allows fuel to flow through the petcock in either the on or reserve position. When you shut the bike off and vacuum is no longer coming from the carburetor, this petcock automatically closes off fuel flow to the carburetor, meaning you don't have to deal with turning the petcock on and off all the time. Now, this is a great feature provided you never run the bike completely out of fuel and therefore can't start it even when it's on the reserve position. Or perhaps you've drained the carburetor over the winter and now you want to get fuel into the carburetor so that you can start the bike, in turn creating the vacuum that allows your petcock to fully open. How do you go about doing that? Well, that is where the PRI or prime setting is. By turning the petcock down into the prime position, this would bypass the need for vacuum and allow fuel to flow into the carburetor, filling the float bowl, allowing you to start it, and then you can turn it just back to the on position and run as normal. So what that tells you is that not all petcocks are the same, and you need to match the petcock to the motorcycle or ATV again that you're using or replacing. Anyway, that's just a little bit of interesting things about petcocks. Now, let's get to work on this Bruin. And I do want to say that I'm going to sort of fast forward through some of this because it's really about how to replace a petcock, not how to replace a petcock specifically on the Bruin. They're all very similar, but they do have different steps. In the case of this Bruin, I have to take all the plastics off. The DR650, well, the tank just lifts off with a couple bolts and gets you access to that petcock. So anyway, let's sort of get back to the Bruin and I'll tell you how to get through this process. Now that I have the plastics off of this, I need to get the tank itself off the bike and up onto the bench so we can replace the petcock. Now on many bikes, like I said, our DR650s, we can pull the tank off quite easily, tip it upside down, drain the fuel out, that kind of thing. On this ATV in particular, it has this extension horn on the petcock. Normally you can take a JIS or a good Phillips screwdriver, stick it down inside that hole, undo a small fastener, and this extension horn will come off, making it much easier to get the tank off. The other thing is, because I can't turn the fuel off, this one just kind of turns arbitrarily. What I'm thinking has happened is the petcock has seized enough that it's stripped the square drive off the end of this particular supply horn. So if I could get this off, I might be able to get a good pair of vice grips and turn the petcock. Unfortunately, nothing I stick down there seems to want to engage on the fastener. So instead, I'm going to just take off the fuel supply line to the carburetor and allow fuel to flow down into a catch tank. In this case, it'll just be a small 1-gallon fuel can. Probably I should be doing this outside. I have wooden floors in my shed here. I have the heat on. Probably not the best thing to do, but I am still going to do it. I've had this tank off before when I cleaned the carburetor on this motorcycle, and it was relatively easy enough for me to just pull it off and stick it into a catch basin. So that's what I'm going to do. Then I'll take the tank off, and once that's done, we'll pick up from there. One thing I've noticed is I think the petcock is stuck in the on position. So there's still fuel in this tank, meaning when I pull this apart or try to slide the tank out, there's the potential fuel is going to flow to this hose. To solve this, I'm going to use one of these vacuum caps and I'm going to stick it in the end of the fuel line here, just like this. And then I'll just bring the fuel clamp up, and this will seal the hose off when I'm trying to get the tank out. When you're doing jobs like this, you've got to come up with solutions to make things safer and not spill gas all over the place. This is my solution for this particular issue. With the petcock now up on the bench, you can see right in here that it's been leaking fuel all around this seam. So probably the O-rings and any gaskets that are in here are just chewed up and not working well. The fuel line itself is very supple. I see no cracking or evidence of damage, so I'm going to actually reuse the stock fuel line. The fuel line that comes with the kit seems to be pretty good, but it's not as flexible and it's not pre-bent the way the factory fuel hose is. The factory fuel hose also comes with this guarding over top of it to provide some abrasion resistance. I like this hose a lot, so I'm going to reuse it. There is still a little bit of fuel left in the tank. I'll take this outside and tip it over and empty it all out. We'll get it back up on the bench and have a look. Now before we get any further, I'm just going to check to make sure that the petcock that I have looks the same. This one does. It looks like everything's going to match up well. So let's get the fuel out of this and we'll start removing this old petcock. To remove your petcock, there's usually 2 screws on the bottom of the tank here. These particular ones, in my case, use a number 3 JIS screwdriver. I'm always concerned when I start doing this because these have threaded inserts in the plastic tank that if you're not careful could strip out. So make sure to use a good fitting screwdriver, push in and turn them out in a nice smooth fashion here. And then once these are unthreaded like this, let's see, the petcock will lift right out. Just about there. Let's see. There we go. And you can see here's your petcock. Here's the two screws. And those will just come right out like that. You're next going to want to come in here and clean this surface very, very well so that the new O-ring seals all around here and you don't get gas leaking. This looks pretty good. The surface is nice and smooth. Should be excellent for the new gasket or the new O-ring gasket to seal on. And here you can see those brass inserts that are molded into the tank. If you over tighten the new petcock, you run the risk of stripping these and they'll start turning within the petcock, or sorry, in the fuel tank itself. So you want to be cautious with that. Okay, let's get the new petcock put together and put in. I am just going to make sure that that gasket is sitting nice. I'm going to gently insert both this into the tank. As I tighten this down, I'm going to ensure that that O-ring gasket doesn't slip out. So I'm going to just keep sort of peeking around. I've got a pretty good view from up here. And I'm going to alternate from one side to the other to make sure that the petcock tightens up flush, that it doesn't sort of end up tighter on one side than the other, which could cause leaks. I'm going to switch over to my larger screwdriver here now and just go in and snug these down. Again, you do not want, you don't want to over tighten these. I'm not sure what the torque rating is because I don't have a manual for this bike. But I'm just sort of gently sort of creeping up on things, going from there. And that feels pretty good. Before I put this back into the bike, I want to make sure that that petcock is sealed well to the bottom of the tank, especially being a plastic tank that can flex a little bit. But how do I do that? Well, you can do it a couple different ways. I'm going to show you a way that isn't probably too smart, but it's always worked well for me, and that is I'm just going to breathe into the tank itself and apply a little bit of air pressure and see with the petcock closed if I can feel anything leaking around there. This is really ghetto. You can do this with a vacuum pump as well. You could hook it up to the vent hose here, but this is just really quick and easy and shows how ridiculously nuts I am sometimes. But here's how I do it. Okay, so I just pressurized the tank. I couldn't feel anything coming from the petcock seal. I think this is good to install back into the bike. And yeah, that's how I pressure test it. Remember, this is a gravity feed system, so there's not really a lot of pressure. I'm sure that I put way more onto it than it would ever see from the weight of the gasoline. Okay, reassembly, and then we'll check it out. Well, I've got all the plastics put back on. I pressure tested the tank again just by breathing into it. Everything seems to be sealed up. The last thing I need to do is put a little bit of fuel in just to make sure that O-ring is sealed, and then I can top it up and probably get this bike back into service. All right, I'm going to do that right now. It doesn't seem like anything's leaking. I'm pretty confident we've got a good seal on this tank. I'm just going to let this thing idle away out here and warm up a little bit. I'm going to close the shop up for a second too. Well, that seems to be running really good. The Petcock has sealed up nice and tight, and I think this bike has many, many more years of leak-free operation. Overall, this was a really, really simple project to do. I would encourage anybody that's got a problem with their Petcock to take it on. It's not that hard. Okay. Well, I really do appreciate everybody stopping by today, and if you like today's content, please by all means leave a comment down below. Feel free to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends so we can all watch the channel grow together. Until then, I'm going to sweep up the shop here. I've got some more projects to do, but I want to see you soon here on Dino's Tinker Shed, so tinker easy. Bye for now.